Welcome back to the second channel, everybody. This is Ash, the Pokemon trainer from the TV show Pokemon. Um, I'm sorry for the lack of uploads the last couple of weeks, I guess it's been. I went on a short vacation, and before I did, I really wanted to get some stuff ready for the main channel, so this took a back seat. But I'm back now, and hopefully I'll be uploading like 3 to 4 times a week again. But yeah, we'll just see how it goes. I'm just glad to be back today, and we'll just go from here. Today we've got some Blackout poetry, and this doesn't look like Blackout poetry, but I'll explain what happened. Well, the author, rather, will explain. But before we get into it, of course, I'm going to read my little thing here. Keep in mind, I'm not a professional reviewer. I'm just some guy on the internet who likes reading and writing. The opinions expressed in this video are only opinions. My interpretation of or reaction to the work will not be the same as everyone else's, for better or for worse. I will look for the good and the bad, but no matter what I say, don't be too hard on yourself, just keep writing. And for those in the comments, please be respectful. Also, I'm so sorry for any mistakes or mispronunciations of names or words. If I come across a word that I don't want to say for whatever reason, I will replace it with the word blank. So, that should cover our bases here. So this is Blackout poetry by an author who goes by the name of Cécil, either Cecil or Cecil. There are no content warnings for this piece, so we should be okay in that regard. But Cecil left us a note saying that they tried to upload the pictures of the actual blackouts that they did, but they said the file was too big, adding the picture of the blackout poetry. So I just typed it instead. I hope you don't mind. I certainly do not mind, Cecil. This will still be just great. I wanted to try poetry but couldn't find the right words, so I bought an old romance book from a used bookstore and tried my hand at blackout poetry. I had fun, and a lot of the pages are not the best, but it was like solving a creative puzzle. Even if I didn't like the poem, the process was satisfying. My goal is to fill up the book with black Sharpie until the last page. Awesome, excellent. Yes, so blackout poetry, also known as erasure poetry, is where you take a pre-existing text and you just start erasing words, and the words that are left unerased, those are the poem, right? So you're likely familiar, Cecil. I would say for you and for anybody else who's interested in blackout poetry, I would really recommend taking a look at Mary Ruefle's work. She is fantastic. And Mary Ruefle's main, critique when she looks at other people's erasure poetry is that they left too many words unerased, which doesn't look like a problem here. I like how a lot of these poems that we're looking at right here, they look tight, they look pithy, right? We'll find out if that's really the case, but I appreciate that, you, Cecil, you weren't afraid to erase as many words as you wanted, which is awesome. And it's too bad that we couldn't get the pictures. I'm sorry that the file size was too big there. I think a big component of erasure poetry really is the way it looks, right? And I think that's largely true for lots of poems. You know, the way they look is important to the fact that they are a poem and to what they're doing poetically, right? But especially blackout poetry. And one thing I really like about Mary Ruefle's work is that she takes really creative approaches to erasure. So it's not just taking white out and, whiting out the words that Ruefle wants to erase, but there's more to it than that, right? She'll use color, she'll use crazy designs, she'll use actual pictures that she's cut out from other places as a means to block out certain words. So it's really, really interesting. It's it's more than just poetry, but it's also visual art, right? So anyhow, all that as a little preface, let's get into all of this. So we'll just take each piece one at a time. Lucy. A month of inactivity. This night, she was thinking of lavender, near where Lucy worked. I like that a lot, actually, at least on first glance. The challenge with erasure poetry is that you are limited in what words you can use, right? Usually with a poem, you can use whatever word you want to, but with erasure poetry, you are left to the letters and the words that are given you, right? And so that's of course the biggest challenge, trying to make something coherent and cohesive based on a pre-existing template, right? I don't know, I'm having a hard time even describing what I like about this poem, but I feel like it does a lot of proper showing versus telling, right? and which is especially hard to do given the fact that we're working from a certain basis here. So a month of inactivity. This night, she was thinking of lavender near where Lucy worked. I don't know, it's just like, it's such a clever way to show like a crush, basically, or enamorment. I don't think that's a word, but being enamored with someone, right? Um, at least that's the vibe that I get from it, right? It's so much more creative than just saying like, I'm thinking about you right now, which would be kind of a boring poem, right? Instead, it's a month of inactivity. This night, she was thinking of lavender near where Lucy worked. So it's not just Lucy, right? But it's the lavender, right? And the opening line there, a month of inactivity, I have to wonder what that means, right? Like, has it been a month without Lucy, or like a month without romance in general, a month without sex? You know, there are a lot of interesting questions that I think are worth asking about this piece. So, you know, again, how I said Mary Ruefle's main critique when looking at other people's erasure poetry is that they need to erase more words. I like that this is like tight, that this is condensed, because there is that temptation when you start doing erasure. It's like, oh, like there are a lot of interesting words on this page and I kind of want to include all of them, but that might actually be to the detriment of the poem, right? Poetry in general, I think, is at its best when it's economic, right? It's even more economic than prose, in my opinion. You have to be very selective about everything that you choose to include in your poem. And I mean, the same is true for prose, but in a different way. So anyway, with that being the case, with how short these poems are, I might not actually have that much to say about them, and I'm sorry for that. Um, yeah, it would be nice to see like what words were erased, but like even with the picture, we probably wouldn't have been able to, because it sounds like Cecil uses Sharpie. And so that would just black out the words completely. That's another method that Mary Ruefle uses sometimes, is like she does erase the words, but like you can still see them underneath, right? Like the method she used to erase them is so light that you can still see them there, which is another really interesting approach. Anyway, our next poem is Their Gazes. Out of desire, out of curiosity, their gazes still locked, the orchestra sounded brief. Interesting. So out of desire and out of curiosity, those are kind of cliche, right? Um, Speaking of erasing more words, right? What if our first two lines, or what if the very first, yeah, our first two lines, we'll go with our first two lines. What if it was just desire, curiosity, their gazes still locked, the orchestra sounded brief? Yeah, like what if we just removed out of, right? Because those phrases are kind of trite, you might say, out of desire, out of curiosity. So what if it was just desire, curiosity, their gazes still locked, the orchestra sounded brief? I don't know, I kind of like the sound of that personally. Of course, it's still good as is, you know, we still have, and speaking of brief, right, we still have that briefness that I think really works in favor of this poetry. At least I think that way personally. Um, and yeah, the ending here takes a really neat turn, which I kind of wasn't expecting. Because, like I said, you know, out of desire, out of curiosity, those are common phrases that we hear, at least with semi frequency, right? Whereas the orchestra sounded brief. That's peculiar. That's interesting. That's really neat, in my opinion. So yeah, I don't know. Again, it's like, like I said, there might not be that much to say here because the poems are short, and of course the text was supplanted. Um, and yet, yeah, there's just something about this one, about both of them so far. It raises a lot of interesting questions, right? You get this picture of like two people at an orchestra, and yet the orchestra isn't the point of focus, right? It's the two of them and their love for each other. So that, again, like kind of like with Lucy, that's really interesting, showing versus telling, and it's really fantastic that you can do that when given the words to erase, right? Our next one is I tried to be good. You know, you know, a lot of times. Oh, dear God, I was good. Okay, that's pretty interesting. I like the tone where it kind of sounds like the speaker is like trying to convince themselves, right? And then also, it seems like they're so insecure that they're, like, asking somebody else for reassurance, right? Like, you know, like, I was good, like, tell me that I'm good, right? I laugh because it reminds me of Ellen and Dakota Johnson. Ellen being like, "Of course I liked you." And she's, like, trying to get Dakota to say, like, "Tell everyone I like you," right? I don't know, irrelevant, I'm sorry. But anyway, a lot of times, oh dear God, I was good. So yeah, to me, there's this sense of denial from the speaker, right? And they're begging to be perceived as good, and even in the eyes of God, right? So I like the "Oh dear God" line. Um, there's just some awkward phrasing, and I guess sometimes you can't really escape that, doing erasure poetry. So like, lot of times, I guess is where it sounds most weird, right? And then "Oh dear God, I was good." So yeah, again, this one very interesting, in spite of its length, I might say. A lot of poetry is interesting, like, because it's really long and there's a lot to explore. And then other poetry is really interesting because of how little it seems to be giving on its face, and yet there's more beneath the surface than that, right? So yeah, it's kind of like haiku in a lot of ways. Anyway, plead harder. I shall plead to the flood of painful memories who would like to recall a laugh. Okay. That one honestly doesn't quite grip me as much because it does feel more on the nose, a little more telling versus showing than our first two examples, right? And then the third example I liked because, the tone seemed to be really well, really curious, really almost at odds with itself. Whereas this one feels very played straight, and it doesn't necessarily feel like there's a lot more going on under the surface here than what's actually in the text, right? I shall plead to the flood of painful memories who would like to recall a laugh. Still, it's pretty cool that you were able to get this with just erasure, right? That these words were all there and available for the picking. Um, yeah, there's not much more to say because, like I said, it does kind of just seem to be saying exactly how it is, exactly what it means, right? So it's really not bad. It's just like not quite on the level of the previous ones for my taste personally. Um, yeah, there's still something to it for sure. Like I said, it is still impressive that you put this together. You had mentioned, Cecil, that like each piece seemed like a creative puzzle. And like, yeah, I get that. It's like you put the pieces together very coherently here, which is awesome. But yeah, I do like the other ones a little better so far. That's all. Next up, always there. Turned away from them, disappeared into the night. Await another. Nobody. Mm. This one also feels maybe a little more on the nose, but also there's some showing versus telling because it feels like an actual scene that we're kind of being dropped into, which is awesome. Um, turned away from them is a really interesting starting line because, it prompts the question, turned away from who, right? Um, I don't know, like, I might be reading into it too much, but it almost reads kind of like somebody who's, like, escaped a cult, right? But they're even though they've escaped, they're, like, still waiting for someone to save them, and there's nobody, right? So, more interesting than it seems on its face, I think, turned away from them, disappeared into the night, await another, nobody. Maybe you don't even need the word "another" there, or if you do wanna have another, and if you wanna format it like this, then maybe another should be on the same line as await, um, but I don't imagine you want to format it like this. You probably want the pictures, right? That's another thing is like there are a lot of really artsy journals out there that really love erasure poetry for its visual component, right? And so I would imagine if you do want to submit these to journals and stuff, you would want to just submit a picture of the page that you erased. I think that personally is more interesting than this, even though there is really a lot of interest in this just as well, right? I really like how some of these line breaks work, to be honest with you. Um, yeah, I don't know if I have much more to say. Yeah. Like, so again, I offer you this option. You can take the word "another" out of there because I think the poem still remains just as strong even without that word, and the brevity might be even stronger, right? But still, even if you decide to keep another, I think it's still really strong. So yeah. Stay vigil. Hope. The flickering light. Remained vigil. The darkness. Welcoming back a missing piece of itself. Interesting. So if it were me, I would probably get rid of the period after the word light. Hope the flickering light remained vigil. Yeah. Yeah, I think those three lines work a little better without that period there interrupting the second to the third line, right? Because each line break already kind of denotes a pause, right? Or at least it prompts the reader to pause a little bit. But that period is telling the reader, like, for sure, you need to stop here and, like, take a second. And I think it works better if the reader doesn't actually take that second. I think it reads better as, hope the flickering light remained vigil. But that's just my opinion. Maybe the period is there for, a very particular reason that the author has in mind, and I'm just not seeing it, which is fine. Um, I like the message here, I always appreciate poetry that can impart a positive message considering, the times that we're living in right now. Hope the flickering light remained vigil, the darkness welcoming back a missing piece of itself. That ending is kind of interesting too, is it saying that the darkness welcomed back to missing piece of itself, as if to say, like, that the hope actually extinguished, that it did not remain vigil, right? Because that wasn't my initial reading. My initial reading was that, like, when it says the darkness welcomed back a missing piece of itself, to me that read is like, I don't know, hard to put into words now, honestly, because I'm leaning more toward the other interpretation now, that the hope did flicker out, that it did not remain vigil, right? But I don't know. I guess I kind of interpreted it as like the light cast a shadow, and that was the darkness taking back a missing piece of itself. But now I'm not so sure. So it's interesting, right? I feel like there are multiple ways we can read that, and for the better, honestly. Um, Sometimes I prefer when poems give definitive answers, right? It really depends on the kind of poem. With poems as short as these, I think it's fine that we don't have everything given to us explicitly, right? Because, I don't know, that almost would kind of defeat the purpose. But it really is kind of case by case for me. So, I don't know. I'd be interested to hear those of you who might disagree, for sure. All right, our penultimate one here is Like a Flea. Oh, I also was curious, do these titles come from the book as well? Um, and if so, how do you distinguish the titles from the rest of the text in the poem, right? Um, there are some poets who just didn't title their poems, and we just used the first line of the poem as the title, like E. E. Cummings and Emily Dickinson. And maybe that's what's going on here. Maybe these titles are meant to be the first lines. Um, Or another thing I've seen in erasure, is, even with Mary Ruefle, is that the author will write on the page and they'll add their own words, which might sound like cheating, but I don't know. To me, it's always very, very interesting. And in fact, some erasure poets will erase the words on the page with their own words, right? They'll write over the text with their own letters, and that is the method of erasure, which is always really, really fascinating to me. So I wonder, right? I wonder if Cecil like wrote these titles on the page or if the titles came from the source text. I'm not sure. I'd be really interested to know. But anyway, let's get into this poem. Like a Flea. Why I am here to suffer more than pest, fearing hiding place. Why I am here to suffer. It does remind me of that meme, right? Like, I think it's from a video game, but I'm not sure which. Like, why are we here? Only to suffer. Um, and I mean, not everybody will be reminded of that, but I think what I'm trying to get at is like, I don't know, it does sound slightly overplayed, right? Like, are we here only to suffer? Like, even divorced from the meme, it's like, I feel like that's a question that's been asked a lot before. So like, why I am here to suffer? I don't know. It's like potentially a little cliche. That's all. More than pest, fearing hiding place. Um, I think I get it where it's like, the speaker is comparing themselves to a flea, and fleas have to hide in order to survive, right? And then the more than pest part, it's like, yeah, fleas are pests and they do a disservice to us and to our pets and whatever. But like, fleas didn't ask to be born. They're just trying to survive the same as anyone else, right? So I get that. And I don't know. Maybe it's the fact that I actually wrote a poem that I feel is kind of similar not that long ago. But like, I don't know, maybe it's a theme that's kind of been done a lot already, and it's fine to explore themes that have been done a lot already in poetry for sure. But that again is the challenge of erasure, where it's like it's hard to supplant your own ideas there with the given words, right? So I don't know. It's still not a bad poem. I still like its construction, much as I have a lot of these other poems. Um, but I don't know. This one, it's not like there's a lot you can change, right? Like maybe you could erase these first two lines and just leave it as more than pest, fearing, hiding place. And I don't know, maybe that would be better. I don't know. I don't know. It's hard to say, especially with a poem as short as this one. Um, I don't know, maybe you leave I am here more than pest, fearing, hiding place. Hmm. Maybe you get rid of place too, right? I am here more than pest, fearing, hiding. I don't know. You got a lot of options here, which is great. And just because this one doesn't quite ring to me the same way a lot of the other ones have, that's okay, right? Not every one of these has to appeal to me, obviously. So I don't know. You can see if you can keep going with that one. You can see if there's more that you can erase. But it's still not like it's still not even bad. It just kind of reminds me of a lot of other poems I've seen and read and ideas I've heard before, right? So, yeah, that's something you can take in mind when you think about this one. Last poem here is called Mind the Fire. It filled her mind, a woman who seemed not much, who came in to tend the fire. Okay, that one is more interesting to me. It reminds me more of these first two where it's like, oh, we have a scene, but we don't have all the context. And so we're left with some really interesting questions, right? Um, when it says it filled her mind, I think the first inclination is like the fire, right? The fire filled her mind. But then a woman who seemed not much, who came to tend the fire. I don't know, like a woman who seems not much. That's an interesting line. Um, and then the whole tending the fire. It's like, who is this woman? Where is she? And what actually is on her mind? Because frankly, I don't think it's the fire. I think it is referring to something else, right? It filled her mind. To me, this is kind of a nice snapshot of this idea of like every every person is living a life just like you are, and they all have thoughts and feelings and emotions just like you do. There's a word for that. Sonder, I think it is, right? Or maybe grok, which is of course what that idiot Elon Musk named his AI after, Grok, the idea of like this idea of empathy, right? That each of us is living our own lives and um really we're not so different from each other, right? We all experience love and sadness and emotion, right? So I don't know. Like I said, I to me it reads like a snapshot of that, where it's like there's this woman, and maybe she's like a servant, right? She comes into this mansion and keeps the fire going, and yet she is also living her own life, right? Her mind is filled with something, right? And even though she seems like she's not much, she's still a human being, right? And she's more complex than any of us could ever know. And so I like that a lot. I really like these ones that feel like snapshots of a life lived, right? Now, that being said, all of these I think are still pretty good, and I'm sure they look even better on the page. And even though they're not like, in their original erasure form, they're still really interesting like this, to be honest. So for me, this was a really engaging read. I thought really, really interesting. And I love erasure poetry for that too. How you can do so much with so little, right? Kind of epitomizes poetry in that way, because to me, poetry is all about doing a lot with not very much, in theory, anyway. So, yeah, this was really cool. thank you, Cecil, for submitting these. Really, really good stuff. Um, yeah, I think we'll leave it there. But yeah, I don't really have any other concluding thoughts. Again, if erasure is something you're interested in, I think Mary Ruefle would be the poet to check out. Of course, there are plenty of other erasure poems worth taking a look at, plenty of other poets worth taking a look at too. Um, I'm reminded of the Donald Trump tweet that just says like pelican. I think it says more than that. And in that case, the poet erased Donald Trump's words and just left individual letters to spell out words, which is also a great strategy when doing erasure. But anyway, yeah, there are a lot of resources if you're into erasure. I always love a good erasure poem, so this was an absolute treat. Anyway, we'll leave it there. Thank you again, Cecil. Viewer, thank you for watching, and ultimately keep in mind, this is a rough draft.